Okay, so we're going to talk about the chemical senses, and that is the detection, of chemicals in the environment. This is olfaction, smell, where we detect what are called odorants, which are chemicals that you breathe into the nose, so they actually, end up touching, specific cells that will then respond with depolarization or some sort of response to initiate an action potential. And also what we call tastants, which are the chemicals of food, right? That you dissolve with enzymes in your mouth, for example, and they're going to reach specialized taste receptor cells that are going to be located in taste buds, and we'll talk about those, and initiate currents going back to the central nervous system. And the chemical senses are kind of unique. They're very ancient senses, where we talked about how the ants also detect odorants, and they respond with very stereotyped sort of behavioral responses. But the chemical senses are kind of unique in terms of their sort of anatomical organization. Most of the sensory systems we'll be discussing, like for example vision or somatosensation, right? There's going to be detection on one side of the body, let's say for somatosensation like touch here, or in vision it'll be like, for example, one half of visual space, like things that are coming in to both my eyes from this half of the visual world out here. At some point in the transit, from detection, back along those networks in the central nervous system to specific areas of the brain, where perceptual experience will be initiated or occur. There is going to be a crossing over. The wires are going to actually cross from one half of the brain to the other, one half of the nervous system to the other. And this is known as a decussation. So decussation is the fancy Latin term for crossing over from one side to the other. So I touch here, and there's going to be some kind of we'll see, it's a pseudo-unipolar, somatosensory tactile receptor, and it's going to work its way into my spinal cord, and then it's going to travel all the way up, the spinal cord to the brainstem and synapse there, and then the next neuron is going to decussate, cross from the right side of my body over to the left side of my body, and then continue up, ultimately to maps in the brain. But the chemical senses are unique in that they do not decussate. They project not to the contralateral, opposite side of the brain, but they project to the ipsilateral, same side of the brain, which means if I close this nostril and just breathe through this one, the right nostril, the wiring is going to send information back to the right side of my brain, the same side, the ipsilateral side. And if I, for example, put a bit of sugar on the right side of my tongue, well, it's going to stimulate taste receptors that are going to send that information ipsilaterally, back into the same side, the right side of my brain. That's unusual in terms of the other senses, which have a decussation, a crossing over, to the contralateral side. The other unique feature of the chemical senses, it is shared with other emotionally salient inputs into the brain, is that the chemical senses, both taste and smell, project to areas of cortex, areas of the outer bark of the brain that are quite ancient. These are actually areas that are called sort of paleocortical or archicortical. They're old areas of cortex. They're not the new areas, the neocortical areas. And what's interesting about these like old regions is that they tend to have more like individually unique kinds of wiring. They evolved a long time ago. They're shared by many other organisms. Taste and smell are ancient senses, and there are more ancient, evolutionarily ancient, portions of the brain, what we refer to as often limbic regions of the brain, areas that are involved in emotional experience and expression that go sort of way back.